I'd been hiking for several hours with a 50-pound rucksack on my back. The weather was rapidly closing in, and visibility was less than 6 feet. There were strong gusts and driving rain. I was completely saturated. I couldn't locate the way out, despite my excellent map reading and compass skills. I used to compete in military navigation and hiking events on a regular basis, and was always in the top 3. Exhaustion set in. My map did not correspond to the terrain. There were huge sheer drops everywhere. I was on the verge of falling off a cliff. I needed to get as much wind protection as possible. I dared to slide down one side of the saddle to reduce the effects of wind and rain. I sat on my back to put some distance between me and the chilly, wet earth. I zipped up my waterproofs as far as they would go, including the hood, to protect my face. I breathed in and out of my scarf, attempting to utilize my breath on my face to slow the rate of heat loss there. I blew my emergency whistle, but the wind blew it back, and it was too high up for anyone to hear. I tried using a flashlight, but the mist was too dense for the light to penetrate. All I could do was wait for the mountain rescue team to find me after I'd used up my contact time with a family member. On the route I was taking, I had a contact time remaining. All I could do was now sit, crouched, and wait for my watch to reach the contact time. It was at least 2 hours away. Shortly after stopping, I began to shiver violently. I began to lose feeling in my toes, which subsequently spread to the remainder of my feet and up my legs. My fingers went entirely numb, despite the fact that I had my hands tucked behind my armpits to keep them warm as long as possible. This sensation moved up my arms and through my hands. I couldn't feel my nose or ears anymore. I needed to urinate right away. Finally, I did it while sitting in my clothes, hoping that the heat would keep me alive a little longer. I was already soaked, and any additional dampness would have made no difference at this point. The heat provided momentary relief from the chill in my buttocks, thighs, and lower waist. My shivering soon slowed and became less intense. Not because I was getting warmer, but because I'd been shivering for so long that I had run out of energy to shiver any longer. As the sun rose and began to set in the mist, I observed how light changed. I was now aware that much time had gone since my last interaction. The mist and weather were quite harsh, and it would be insane for a rescue crew to venture out in it. To find me in the mist, they'd have to be on top of me. It was a no-go due to the pounding rain, wind, and mist, as well as the slick terrain and sudden unexpected drops. The best I could hope for was a helicopter to appear out of nowhere through a breach in the mist. Time passed, and I caught glimpses of settlements far below, off in the distance, until they were shrouded by the mist once more. I then began to pass in and out of consciousness, with the out-of-consciousness stage consisting of remaining numb but experiencing very genuine hallucinations. I then considered a new strategy, shoving my rucksack ahead of me, and relied on it suddenly disappearing as a warning of a sharp drop there. The terrain was steep and exceedingly slick. The pack might slip away from me due to the gradient and slipperiness of the surface, so I couldn't rely on this. The other extreme was that once the pack vanished, it might be too late to stop myself from falling over the edge. I seriously pondered leaving. Dying from the cold would be far faster than dying from hypothermia, which was rapidly coming. I didn't have the energy to get up off the ground. To slide down, I'd have to rely on the gradient and slipperiness of the surface. I opted to stay and die where I was, since I didn't want anyone to be upset if they found my broken body on a cliff face. After years of education and unemployment, I was set to qualify as a nurse. My hiking abilities and strength had devolved into my very limitations, I reasoned at the time. My attempt to prove my independence through my own abilities and expertise backfired. None of my mountain survival skills, navigation skills and expertise, or newly acquired nursing skills and experience could save me. I had money in my account, but I wouldn't be able to spend it because I wouldn't be present. I had abandoned my will. I began to wonder how long it would take before someone realized I was missing. How long would it take for my body to be discovered? I couldn't write a note since my hands couldn't move. Life's futility and everything associated with it began to dominate my thoughts and feelings. I knew I was going to die soon. I hoped there was life after death, because the person I'd most loved had perished half my life earlier. I remembered she was a devout Baptist who would be in heaven. I wasn't going to see her again, even if there was life after death, because I'd abandoned faith many years earlier. I continued to have hallucinations and despised having to face the reality of my predicament. I eventually began to pray. I wished to be reunited with the person I adored. My prayers grew more fervent and meaningful for the gift of my life and for all the people I'd met along the way. My hallucinations continued, and I stayed in them for longer and longer periods of time each time. Then, all of a sudden, I had an experience unlike anything I'd ever had before. I lost all physical sensations all of a sudden. The cold has taken its toll on my physique. I had such a good emotional experience that it's difficult for me to put into words. I was in a really bright setting, and the only other person in front of me was a man in his early 30s, around 5 feet 10, wrapped in a robe and with his arms outstretched. He was beaming, radiating peace and joy. Behind him stood a solid-looking object in the shape of a cross, taller than him. I didn't have a body of my own. I simply was. I was conscious that I was no longer living because I was experiencing such tremendous serenity, pleasure, and love. I found myself back on the mountain saddle, desperately wanting to die and return to where I'd abruptly left. I kept asking to go back there, expecting to be told that I needed to be spiritually pure of heart in order to return. I'd be right back there if that happened. I began to wonder that there was another purpose for my return as time passed and my praying got more fervent, then less intense. God had desired me back for some reason, although I had no idea what it was. I considered committing suicide by letting myself fall off the cliff edge, which I soon realized was only a few feet away. Despite the fact that the night had been relatively brief, daylight arrived considerably faster than I had anticipated. The mist had dissipated, and the path down was only a few feet away, slightly below to my left. I found myself suddenly having the strength not only to pick myself up, but also to stagger a few miles down and back to the nearest remote house for assistance. The owners greeted me and were astounded that I'd survived the night up there. Finally, I told them about my experience the previous 24 hours while waiting to be picked up by the person who should have raised the alarm. They hadn't done so. They assumed I'd simply forgotten to contact them. I still have tingling in all of my fingertips to this day. I altered my career path after more than 2 decades of working and learning as a nurse, public health nurse, and a public health practitioner. Now, I'm continuing to investigate privately the impact of spirituality in wild places on humans, and I've recently turned it into a business using an action research or community development methodology to help people with their spiritual health.